Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Lang, and welcome to this webinar being hosted by Small Business Australia. Our topic over the next 30 to 40 minutes is all around reorganising your small business to survive. I just want to show each of you a short document which is called the 5-Step Small Business Survival Plan. If you haven't already downloaded this, I'd ask you after the webinar to visit smallbusinessaustralia.org. There you'll be able to complete some details and then we will send you through a copy. In effect, the checklists that relate to this particular webinar are laid out inside this document in terms of the key areas and topics that we discuss in the document and some of the key questions that we recommend all small business owners start asking themselves and asking their teams as they develop their survival plan. I see that some of you that have joined us this afternoon were also participants in this morning's 5-Step Survival Plan webinar, so welcome back. For everybody, we plan on having versions of these webinars available for you to be able to replay or share with other business owners in coming days. I'm just going to add some more people now into the room that have just asked to join us. So if you just bear with me, please. Thank you. And I'm going to now move to sharing or moving to another slide in terms of what I'm sharing with you, just to provide an overview of how the next 45 minutes or so will work. So I plan to present for 30 to 40 minutes. I currently have everybody on mute so that there's no background noise from your viewing locations. But when I finish presenting, I will turn that off so that if anyone does want to actually ask a question, you'll be able to ask a question. If you're more comfortable typing in questions, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll either see a button called More with a few dots next to it, or perhaps you'll see one called Chat. That's an area where you can type questions that you think of as we go along. And I will have a look at those when I finish presenting and address those for you in the question and answer area. We've sent through to a number of you some very high level overview slides to provide an overview of what we're going to be covering. Not everything is written on those slides. We encourage you to take some notes. If in fact you don't have a printout of the slides, I encourage you to get a clean sheet of paper or two to take down some detailed notes as we're going through the webinar. Look, you know, Small Business Australia fundamentally exists to help small business people create a much better small business sector. You know, we haven't been faced as a country or a world with a crisis like we're going through now. So in many respects, there are no instruction manuals that everyone from the level of government down to a small business owner can pull out and follow exactly. What we have done at Small Business Australia now is interacted with more than 700 small business owners since the middle of March to understand what their key concerns have been and what sort of help they are looking for, both from different levels of government and in terms of guidance from their advisors like accountants and bookkeepers and lawyers and people that are in the field of business, small business education. So what I'm going to be taking you through over the next 30 minutes or so is a summary of that material as it relates to one particular step of 5 steps, and that step is all around reorganizing your business. I'll just move you through very quickly and talk you through what the 5 steps are. So the first is around realisation of the situation that we're in, and I'll talk very briefly about that in a minute. Today is largely about reorganising, and in particular 4 areas to be reorganising your business in. The third step is around reinvention. We have a webinar on tomorrow that will talk through in more detail how to think about and start planning the reinvention of your business. The fourth then is around reskilling, identifying the key skills that you and your team members will now need to develop or get much better at to enable your business to survive and thrive. And then the fifth step is all around how you go about restarting, particularly if you're having to pull the business out of this stage of hibernation. For those of you that attended this morning, you will recall that I talked a little bit about step number 1, which is realisation. And I can share with you that in the last few weeks, particularly since Easter, the realisation has started to hit, I think, everybody, particularly in Australia, and in many other countries around the world, that things are not going to bounce back or snap back to exactly what they were like, you know, in our case, say in early February here in Australia. So the word hibernation is being used, and I've got a couple of pictures there, one of a brown bear. Now, the brown bear is able to hibernate because every year he needs to hibernate. And prior to going to sleep during the winter in his cave, he eats as much as he can to put on as much extra fat around his body. And that is what provides him with the energy to sleep through and succeed through hibernation without actually having to eat while he's in a deep coma sleep. Now, the challenge for many small businesses is there weren't necessarily a whole bunch of nuts stored up by squirrels before hibernation, or a lot of feasting on cash flows and profits when this hibernation period was imposed upon us. Now, the second photo there that you can see is of a female polar bear. And the female polar bear is very different from the brown bear in that she doesn't necessarily eat up before hibernation, let alone fall asleep when she's in the cave. In fact, when she's in her cave, she gives birth to a new baby polar bear and brings that polar bear into existence. And as spring comes along, they come out of the cave. That's very relevant for us because as small business owners, we really can't afford to fall asleep at this particular point in time. We can't hibernate. We have to be using this time to come up with what our survival plan will be. And there are not many small businesses at the moment that are not facing the very dire prospect of possibly being out of business in coming weeks or in coming months. One of the most important things for all of us to do is to find relevant and accurate and trustworthy information, particularly as it relates to our own health. Probably one of the most important things as owners we need to be getting on top of is our own personal health. And I'm not just talking about mental health, I'm talking about the health of your immune system and your ability to be able to fight off any form of infection while all your energy is directed towards having your business survive and looking after your families. So at the bottom of this slide, I have a website address, which is from the Harvard Medical School. And this is the source of, only source of information that I go to as it relates to health information. I'm not following someone wearing spandex or Lululemon on Instagram who's an influencer who doesn't have any credentials and qualifications. I'm following what the Harvard Medical School is recommending with respect to how to boost your immune system. So that's what that link is about, and you'll find a link and more information in the actual guide in terms of the 5-step plan. But today is all about step number 2, and I'll just move us on to step number 2. Step number 2 is all about reorganization. And what I'm going to talk about over the next 15 or 20 minutes and get into some detail about are the following 4 areas that we need to be thinking about and acting on in terms of reorganizing the business. Now, in some cases, this work is well and truly started. Some businesses started very, very early. Some effectively were told you cannot have any customers, you cannot operate at this stage, potentially for up to 6 months' time. And so those businesses in particular have had to dive into these elements or these areas very quickly. Let me just talk about the 4 areas at a high level, and then we'll go through them one by one. The very first one is minimizing cash outflow. As we know, the cash flow is like the blood running through the veins of any business. If there's not positive cash flow, the body or the business dies. Customers are another important area. Customers are like the oxygen. If we don't have customers that value our products and services and come along and buy them, without oxygen, the body can't survive. So think of cash flow as the blood and customers as the oxygen. So area number 1 is minimizing cash outflows, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Area number 2 then is registering for any forms of cash inflow that might be available from any levels of the government. Now, I think it's fair to say across the board that our leaders at various levels of government are looking at the situation on a day-by-day basis and then coming up with policies and programs and announcing them to make the greatest contribution that they believe they can make to dealing with the virus, and then secondly, keeping the economy alive and having it ready to restart. But in many respects, the gap between what is announced and then the mechanics as to how it works can lead to some disappointment, particularly amongst some small business people, when they originally had thought that they might be eligible for something, and then they find that they are not. But the key point here is to register for all the things that you may be eligible for. Just this morning, further changes were announced with respect to the JobKeeper initiative that's being made available by the government. I think there have been, since the announcement of that particular initiative, 4 changes in terms of how it works. So it's critical to be registering for these things to get into the queue to some degree, because while you may not be eligible now, you may find next week that you are. And the further along in the queue that you are, in cases of a first in, first out, it's more likely then that you'll be able to access what will be available. And the quicker you get that cash flow coming in, the greater your likelihood of surviving and moving beyond survival. Area number 3, the oxygen of the business, customers. We need to be able to find them, and we need to be able to have a conversation with them. We need to talk to them. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through this webinar. But tomorrow, again, we have a webinar that is dedicated to this area number 3, that gets into some of the very practical things to do in terms of how you plan it, how you rehearse it, how you go about doing it, particularly using some of the digital tools that increasingly people are interacting with, things like Facebook and the Facebook Messenger app. The 4th area then in terms of reorganization is getting online fast. At the end of 2019, there were 2 million small businesses in Australia. Our research and current forecasting is indicating that possibly 100 to 150,000 have already decided in the last 6 weeks to close. And depending on how long the lockdowns last and how quickly economic activity starts to come back on, we might find ourselves with another 300,000 or 400,000 that will fail. Now, that is going to be a tragedy for those business owners, for their families, and importantly for the communities, where those small businesses are the heart and soul of those local communities. So getting online fast is important because MYOB conducted some research at the end of 2019, and they found that 1 in 2 of the 2 million, so that's 1 million or 50% of small businesses did not have a website, had minimal use of social media, and were not able to actually take orders, interact beyond email, and actually arrange for the delivery of products and services and take payment online. So again, it's another very meaty topic. We'll talk through a few of the specifics associated with it, but it's a critical area to be reviewing if you are already online, or to be moving very, very fast to get yourself online in a practical way to start serving the customers that you've had recently that at the moment may be getting forced to deal with competitors because you don't have that basic online presence that's needed. Minimize cash outflow. Let me take you through some of the mechanics here. Suppliers, whether they be suppliers of finance like banks or insurance companies or leasing companies, whether you have a landlord if you're leasing business premises, whether you rent IT related software, whether you have physical products that you buy in and put in inventory and then you sell and retail, it's critical that you get a conversation going with these people as soon as possible. Now, one reason for that is that you can't expect that the suppliers are going to necessarily ring up you as a customer. If they don't hear from you, the assumption is largely going to be that you are okay, that you're not someone they need to be concerned about or need to be having conversations with in terms of adjusting how things work. So we've got sort of a 5-step process here in terms of minimizing cash outflow. What we recommend you do is you make a list, go through all your key expenses, and then make a list of, do you have a personal contact at that supplier? Do you have a banker that you deal with on a regular basis, or a finance broker? Are you interacting with a real estate agent on behalf of the landlord, or do you deal with the landlord directly if you rent your premises? But you need to make the list, make a list of who you actually have a form of relationship with, which in some cases you may not have no relationship. There's no one at the electricity company, no one at the telecommunications company, for example. Then the thing to do is to turn that list on its head and put it in a ranking based on who is the friendliest, who do you have the best relationship with, down to who you have, the poorest relationship with, through to who you have no relationship with. So we're creating a list. of suppliers, people that you've got key expenses with, but at the very top, we're putting who the friendliest people are. Before we contact the people at the top of the list, we need to have some clarity. We need to be really clear about what is it that we want to ask from that supplier? What is it that you'll need? Do you need to be able to defer making payment? Are you decreasing the level of orders that you're doing? Are you looking for a renegotiation, let's say, of rental of an office premise? So therefore, you're looking to decrease the level of expense. So be very clear and write against the name, what is my objective? What's the goal that I've got with that particular supplier? Step number 3 then is to do some rehearsal. Like if you're not comfortable in necessarily having these types of conversations, you know, in the past, you do a little bit of shopping around every few years, you pick someone to provide you with something, and unless things terribly go wrong, you just let things go on. If you're not as confident in these sorts of conversations, we recommend you do some rehearsing. Now, we've got a simple little process that we call the ASP. And ASP stands for ask about them, share what's going on with your business, and then make a proposal. So A is for ask, S is for share, and P is for make a proposal. And what do I mean by ask? Well, you know, they're in business as well. How are things going for them? And you may know that, you know, the particular industry that they're in, let's say they're a provider of fresh food and ingredients to restaurants, as an example. Any number of restaurants are not able to actually have diners come in and sit down, let's say in Victoria and a couple of the other states as well. So find out how things are going with them and in their business. Have they had to lay some people off, stand them down, terminate them? Are they looking to take advantage of some of the initiatives like JobKeeper? But let's get into their world and understand more about the situation that they're in. More likely than not, they're going to ask you, how are things going with you? Even if they don't, you can now share with them what your situation is, that you've got to survive, you know, that revenue's been hit, for example. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but you're planning to come out of this, so you're implementing a survival plan. You need some help from them to be able to get through this, and specifically, you propose whatever the particular type of help is that you're looking for. The deferment of some payment, the decreasing of orders, asking for ideas from them on how they think they might be able to help you maintain as much cash reserves in the business that you can over coming months. So that's step number 3. Once you've gone through that rehearsal a couple of times, I encourage you to do it with your partners, get in front of a mirror. The calmer and more confident you are, the better it's going to go. Another thing, you know, we can share with you that will make it more effective, you're going to be better off standing up on the phone and chatting with them when you do it, rather than necessarily sitting down. You know, by definition, when we sit down and we're in chairs, our body's more constricted, we lose energy. It can often lead us to be feeling a little bit more negative, a little bit more pessimistic. So I encourage you to be standing up and on the phone. You've rehearsed it, you're clear about what your objectives are, you follow the ASP process. Then we're on to step number 4, let's make the call. So make the call and track, yes, I've made the call, I've been able to get through to them, have the conversation. You know, if you don't get through to them, you know, leave them a message that you've called them, let them know when you're available, if they could call you back, but get a conversation. And then in terms of the conversation, what took place? Was something agreed? If something was agreed, take some notes down against that particular supplier, that particular contact. And then step number 5 is to follow up. Then confirm, you know, via email, if some verbal agreement has been reached with respect to what the supplier has agreed to do. So minimizing cash flow is absolutely critical. I know in the areas of bankruptcy law at a personal level and also at a corporate level, if you're a proprietary limited type company, there have already been changes announced by the federal government, making it much more difficult for small businesses to be put into personal or into corporate bankruptcy, and that these will last over coming months. We ourselves will be putting forward a paper to the government next week where we will be arguing that should businesses and small business owners need to go bankrupt, they should not have to incur the typical penalties of going bankrupt in a normal environment where someone has borrowed too much money, hasn't been able to run their business properly, took on too much risk. That if you're a COVID-19 created bankruptcy, we believe at Small Business Australia that, as the engine room, as the heart and soul, we need those small business owners that have to go down that path to be able to get back into business, get going again, to bring their energy and their capability, back to their own livelihoods and back to their local communities. So that's sort of minimizing cash outflow as the first area. Let's move on now to the next area. And just before I do that, I think I mentioned, the concept that, look, with communication, silence is communication. So as I say, look, you cannot not communicate. The suppliers, if they don't hear from you, are likely to assume that things are okay with your business. So we must, be at step number one, realize we've got to take a lot of action. We can't be hibernating and not acting. Step number two, we've got to be reorganizing. And the very first area of reorganizing is minimizing the cash outflow. Area number two, register for government help. As I mentioned earlier, in many respects, governments around the world are determining the policy responses and the programs. Sometimes they'll call them stimulus, and getting them out there sort of step by step as they come up with them. They interact with different industry organisations. They interact with the tax office. They interact with the Securities Exchange, and they come up with a particular program. They then have to get it through the Parliament to get the approval of the Australian Parliament to do it. Then they'll make the announcement about it. More often than not, the people responsible then for implementing it then have to go very quickly and work out how are they going to implement it and make it work. And so, as I've said, and this occurs both at sort of federal, state and local level, the eligibility and what is available is, in our experience now, continually changing. We're seeing changes in a number of these areas every 3 or 4 days. As more people apply, see that there's actually a gap, they make an adjustment. So it's critical to register, to get yourself in these digital queues as quickly as possible, as we then determine, well, how will some of these things be applied? A very important one with the federal government and state government initiatives will be to work in partnership with your bookkeeper and to work in partnership with your accountant. There are particular rules. Has your small business, reduced its revenues by more than 30%? Are you in a particular industry? There's a range of things like that that you will benefit from the guidance of your bookkeeper and benefit from the guidance of your accountant. There are also implications around what is treated as revenue. Now, we know as business owners that unless the cash comes into the bank, we haven't really earned it. For as much as we've done the work and generated an invoice, we've all had customers that haven't in the end paid on invoice for whatever reason. But with respect to some of these programs, in talking with your accountant and bookkeeper, it's actually the accounting income. What is going into the system is being counted with respect to what the reduction is. And so check with them and check with them early, because it may have implications for when you do invoicing, for example, for the current month of April, assuming that your business is still operating and you operate on an accounts basis, providing credit to your customers. At the state level, again, a number of the things that have been announced are around payroll tax relief or land tax relief, which if you, own land or own your business premises, that may be of value to you. If you're larger than the typical small business with a larger number of employees and you've got payroll, that may also be of benefit to you. But again, these things are changing. The third area then is local government. I encourage you to get to your local government websites and see what they're doing. Now, Small Business Australia, our national headquarters are here in Victoria, in the suburb of Fitzroy. And next to us is a suburb of Carlton, which is in the City of Melbourne local government area. Now, the City of Melbourne moved very quickly compared to other large local government areas and have a number of initiatives and programs available for businesses that have their operational locations inside the City of Melbourne. To give you an idea, they've got $2,000 grants available to help Melbourne-based small business owners, the City of Melbourne-based, get some additional training and coaching and professional development in areas like digital business skills. They have other grants available up to $5,000 to help those same sorts of businesses get help with getting online fast and being able to move much more of what they used to do over the telephone, through the mail, face-to-face as customers would come in, moving more of that online. Because it's moving and changing and the definitions being refined, have a look at something in Google called Google Alerts. Now, if you've never used Google Alerts before, it's a really neat way of setting up some keywords. You type in, for example, City of Melbourne small business grants. And anytime something changes on the internet, so Google is crawling all over the internet and looking at the different web pages, categorizing them, updating them all the time. But if something changes at the City of Melbourne website that relates to small businesses and grants or COVID-19 support, you'll get an email about it. So you'll be alerted. You can do the same thing with australia.gov.au. It's the key website from the Australian government that leads you to the appropriate other websites to look at. Same thing with the state of Victoria. So for every state and every local government area, think about setting up Google alerts on those keywords. And then different government departments have also established newsletters that they are sending out every 24, 72 hours based on when there's an update about things. So without you having to go backwards and forwards and be checking these government websites, you can subscribe to those newsletters. You can use things like Google Alert so you're in the loop. But whatever's out there now, go and register for it. We believe there's every likelihood that these things will change in some way that will make them more able to be claimed by more businesses. So that's area number 2. I move on now to area number 3. Now, I talked about cash flow being the blood of any small business, and we need it pumping and circulating around. But we also need oxygen. The customers are the oxygen. Now, there are many small businesses out there, particularly those that have never felt in the past they've needed to actually create a list of their customers, where this is now a major gap in their ability to survive. They've had people coming into their retail stores. Perhaps they didn't have a digital presence, a good website or a newsletter with specials. Customers would just come in from time to time and buy something. Maybe they were retailing gifts. So they'd be retailing things around a particular time of the year when people would come in. There's never been a more important time now to go and find your customers and to start a conversation with those customers. So if you're fortunate enough to already have some lists, in the ideal world, you'll know the customer's name, you'll know their physical address, their mobile phone number, their email address. If you use things like Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, they're following you on those particular social media sites. In the ideal world, you've got all of that information. If you don't have it, you need to start thinking about how can I get it? How can I track some of this stuff down? And you'd be amazed at what you can find on platforms like Facebook in terms of people living in the local area. Things like the electronic white pages are still out there at census.com.au. But investing time and energy in finding those contact details to be able to communicate with those customers will be well worth it. Once you've got the list, the second step then is to actually check in on them, to make contact with them, to let them know, hey, it's Bill from Small Business Australia. I'm just checking in to see how you're going through this whole COVID-19 crisis that we're dealing with. How are you guys coping? Are you keeping well? An open-ended question, very authentically and caringly asking to see how they're going. Based on how they're going, you can then ask that question around, well, how can you help? Is there a way that you might be able to help them? From then you get the opportunity to move to step 3. You've shown how much you care. There may be some practical things you can do to help them, but you can now provide them with a very simple update in terms of what you guys are doing, that the business is still open, or the business has now moved to doing home deliveries, or the business is collecting things from other businesses in the area. Now, I live in Carlton, in the Melbourne area here in Victoria, Lygon Street, Carlton. That's where my local cafes and restaurants are. And a bunch of those businesses have banded together. And rather than having to pay the costs of using delivery services like Uber Eats and others, they've created their own little delivery service where literally you can get meal boxes, where you can have a combination of the food they provide, other groceries and things, delivered by people that were their baristas, were their servers, were their assistant cook hands, to people that are in the local area. They've been communicating that out to the customers that they've got contact details for. They've also been using things like letterbox drops to make contact with residents in the local area to let them know they're still going. You can't come and sit down and have a restaurant meal or come and sit down and have a cafe experience, but we can still bring to you some of these things if you don't want to be going out to collect takeaway. One of the, you'll probably hear a little bit of a noise in the background there, and it's another good example, right? This is something being delivered to our office here in Fitzroy. I think we're getting an average now of 3 or 4 deliveries a day of various things, whereas in the past we might have had 1. So again, things are changing for customers, and they're not going to snap back to the way things were very easily or very quickly. Once customers have had this experience now of doing things more digitally, they're finding it's more convenient. They won't need to go out as much. They can adjust the way they go about buying. Once they've done that, they're not going to go back. And that really leads me on, to what the 4th area, which is getting online in a serious way fast. In terms of, my last comment on this particular area though is, we hear about social distancing, and I actually don't like the word social distancing. I think it's actually physical distancing. Like, we have to keep, in America, 6 feet, here in Australia, 1.5 meters apart. But that doesn't mean we should be socially keeping apart from our customers. We need to find them. We need to track them down. We need to see how they're going. We need to see how we can help. And we need to let them know what's going on with us. The fact that we are still in business, or we're making some changes, or now you can order online, or what those things might be. So this whole uncertainty still remains very high. Now, I think about my own sense of uncertainty before Easter, and I recall, something that I was taught in a workshop many, many years ago, and that was that, the pain of uncertainty is far greater than the certainty of pain. Now, we all now realize that our businesses are all experiencing pain, except for a few very small areas. So we have the certainty of the pain. That's why the realization, step 1, has now come through. Step 2, many businesses are reorganizing. Again, inside the plan that you can download, you'll effectively see the checklist in terms of the key questions to be asking, the key steps to be taking. Now let's have a look at area number 4, and that's getting online fast. Now, what am I talking about in terms of getting online fast? So a website is critical. One of the challenges of not having a website is, to some degree, you're relying upon the continued performance of people like Facebook or Instagram. Instagram's owned by Facebook. Maybe you use WhatsApp to communicate with some customers, owned by Facebook. But fundamentally, businesses like Facebook, Google, they are advertising businesses. And if your only presence, digital presence, is on there, you're literally relying upon them to provide the racetrack to run around, as opposed to owning your own racetrack, having your own website. So good websites these days let you do a few things. They provide relevant information to anyone that visits them. 55% of people that get on the internet these days, they're doing it from a smartphone, from an iPhone or an Android phone. So the website needs to be able to automatically look good on a phone, as well as on a tablet. 10% of people are on their iPads. And then you've got the rest of people who are actually coming in via either a laptop or a larger screen desktop computer. So it has to be friendly on the mobile phone. It's got to have the relevant information. It's got to enable customers to interact with you. If they've got a question, can you answer it straight away? They've got to be able to order or make a booking. There's some great things happening now in terms of online telehealth consultations, being able to book in a session, just like we're doing here on Zoom. Being able to pay online for something, being able to organize delivery. So get a website in place that lets you do that. The second area then is around social media and making sure you are leveraging it. So while Facebook and Google and Microsoft owns LinkedIn, they own those racetracks, you are still able to have a presence there, a quick summary about your business, that it's easy for your customers to find it, like it, to share any news that you might put up on that website. There are many, many of these pages that are out there, and they've literally been abandoned. Now, I was just looking at one yesterday. I have a coupon that I bought at a fundraising auction, and I thought, I wonder if this thing is this business is still open, and I wonder, given that this coupon or this voucher runs out at the end of June, whether I'm going to be able to use it. Went to the website. I've sent a contact us message. Haven't heard anything back for 72 hours. Got on Facebook. Found it on Facebook. The last time anything about the business was actually put on Facebook was 2 years ago, which was within the first 4 weeks of them creating a page on Facebook. So if you do have these things and the information is not current, the assumption will be that the business has basically died. And when in fact I know that this particular hairdressing salon hasn't died yet, but it's going to be looking for customers, and the owner needs to be keeping that thing alive from a digital point of view as well. The third thing in terms of getting online fast is around some of what we call key digital assets. So customer information. You can see from that earlier area how critical having good customer information is. There's a buzzword or a bit of jargon out there that the younger business owners will know well. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. There are a number of online customer relationship management platforms available for free that small business owners can take advantage of. They're very easy to learn how to use and to put them in place in your business. Various apps is short for applications or software programs that will enable you to interact. It's very easy to have a simple app plugged into your website that pops up when someone's there and says, have you got a question you want to ask? And that question, if they ask it, can then be sent straight to your mobile phone. So now you've got a customer that you can actually interact with. Those websites that are using these forms of digital assets, building up the information on a CRM, being able to interact through apps like that, being able to use things like Zoom. So we're using Zoom today. In December, if you said to someone, what's Zoom? They'd say, oh, it's something you do on your smartphone or your digital camera to sort of, get people coming in a bit closer. I was interacting with the leadership team of Zoom in San Francisco last week. They told me they had 10 million people have Zoom meetings during December. So over the whole month of December, last year, 10 million people interacted with Zoom over that month. They tell me that on the 14th of April, there were 200 million people setting up on that day, having those sorts of meetings. So this video conferencing that I'm doing now, or we use it as live interactive video education, it's here to stay. So everyone needs to learn how to use it and put it to work in the business so that you can have a Zoom meeting with a prospective customer. You might even then be able to deliver the services that you would provide. Saw a great example this morning, early on the ABC TV news. Typically, young kids have gone back to school this time of the year. If you're in the shoe business and sell children's shoes, back to school shoes, this is typically a time when a bunch of parents will come in and buy a new pair of barter shoes or whatever the brands are these days for the children. But they want the proper size shoes fitted for the children. So what's this business done? They have sent out to their past customers where they've had their email addresses, a little kit that they can print out that shows whether when the foot goes on that kit, what the appropriate size shoe is in the barter range and in 2 other ranges of shoes. At the same time, the customer then can click a button, go directly video connected through Zoom and have a 5 to 8 minute conversation with the sales representative, the shoe expert, who then pulls out those size shoes and can show the customer exactly whether they're rounded shape, how big the heel is, those sorts of things. Then if the customer wants to buy them, the order can be taken online, the payment can be made online, and the shoes will be delivered in the next 48 hours maximum. So that's an example of a business that in the last 5 weeks have got online fast and are interacting with and continuing to make sales, even though the front door of the retail store has been closed now for over 4 weeks. The last item here on this slide, number 4, learning support. There are a number of federal, state and local government initiatives where you can actually access some funding towards getting better in this online area. The other thing is, though, that most of the websites and most of the apps and platforms have very good, easy to follow, well-produced educational videos that you can watch. So for example, Zoom and the Zoom Help Center has very good short videos that you can follow, instructions that you can print out, that you can learn how to use a basic app like Zoom for doing a basic meeting very, very easily. But many small business owners don't realize that if they've hired a school leaver who might be working, it might have joined the business in the last 12 months, is working part-time, that they can access up to $1,500 for that school leaver to actually do a certificate in small business. And in doing that certificate in small business, they can use this type of interaction, but the projects they have to do for doing their certificate are actually things to put in place in your small business. And in that case, the $1,500, you know, when the part-time employee is finished, or if it's a full-time employee, it's $4,000. When they successfully complete the course, which means they've learnt these things and put them in your small business, you, the small business owner, receive $1,500 to $4,000. That's called doing a traineeship. It's what now in the digital economy, we have, of course, apprenticeships in blue-collar, physical, manual types of jobs. But now what I'm describing is a traineeship, a white-collar, digital-related job. And there are hundreds of thousands of small businesses in Australia that are eligible to take advantage of that type of learning support. I'll just move on now to the final area before I then switch myself back onto camera and then take any questions that you might have. You'll see here sort of 3 areas of information and what the website addresses are for you to get more information. So as I said, the full survival plan, which in effect has the checklist within it. It has the specific dot points, key questions to ask yourself, some examples to have a look at. You can go and get that and just download it from smallbusinessaustralia.org. If you've already got it, we hope that you've found it very useful. If you've got questions about it, make sure you contact us at Small Business Australia.